Hello. This week's Sedrat is Sedrat Yitro. Yitro, if you remember, was Moshe's father-in-law who lived off far in Midian, offered Moshe shelter at the beginning of his life. This week, Yitro decides who the right team to choose is, who to root for, and decides to move from his faraway home in Midian and join Bnei Yisrael on their trek across the desert. Besides the exciting story of Yitro, we have probably the most pivotal moment in Jewish history, the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. Not solely a revelation to one person, this was a revelation to the masses. All of Bnei Yisrael got to experience what it is to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifest himself in the physical. It's an exciting Sedra, one that really all of our history depends on. This Shabbat, don't whittle away the time. Take advantage of it. Open up the Chumash, read through the Sedra, see what Matan Torah really was. It's exciting and you won't be disappointed. As the Sedra begins, we read about Yitro and what motivated him to move to Bnei Yisrael and join with them. We read about the miracles, but there's an odd phrase in the pasuk, and that's what I'd like to examine for a couple of moments. The phrase is as follows. It says that Yitro heard all that happened to Moshe and Bnei Yisrael. The Medrash asks the obvious question. Wasn't Moshe part of Bnei Yisrael? Why did the Torah have to list Moshe separately from Bnei Yisrael? The Medrash gives an interesting answer. It explains that what Yitro heard about Moshe wasn't coming to explain what Yitro heard. It's a totally separate point. And in order to really appreciate this point, we have to go back in history a little. If we remember, Moshe grew up in Paro's palace, next in line to be the next Paro. And a decision that really changed his whole life. He sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. Having to decide between his old heritage and his new, he decides on the old and decides to be a Jew and kills the Egyptian, stopping him from beating the Jew. Paro, understanding that Moshe Rabbeinu was rejecting him and his whole lifestyle, views Moshe as a traitor to the Egyptian people and demands his head. Moshe runs and finds shelter with this man in Midian, Yitro. Yitro, for some reason, had pity on Moshe. Not only that, but he was impressed with Moshe's character and even offered his daughter's hand in marriage to him. But we can imagine how Yitro viewed Moshe, not as this great individual, but rather as this pitiful, humble person. He was a charity case to Yitro, and he probably viewed him as such, as a nebuch. At a certain point, Moshe has the revelation at the burning bush, and Hashem commands him, now it's time to leave Midian, come back to Egypt and free the Jewish people. Being obedient, Moshe decides to listen to Hashem and begs Yitro, his father-in-law, for permission to return. Yitro grants that permission. All along, though, we have to imagine that throughout the years, Yitro viewed Moshe still as this pitiful person. But now, in this week's Sedra, the dynamic of the relationship has changed. No longer does Yitro have the upper hand. Now Moshe Rabbeinu, his son-in-law, is the great leader of the Jewish people. The people that brought down, with God's help, the world power of the Egyptians. The dynamic is completely different now. Yitro now has to look up to Moshe, as opposed to looking down at Moshe. And that's the idea. Yitro heard all that happened to Moshe, all that happened to Moshe in terms of his change, becoming a leader. And he heard what happened to Bnei Yisrael, the splitting of the sea, the destruction of the Egyptians. Two completely different things that Yitro heard. But this doesn't just provide a lesson for us in terms of the dynamics of Yitro and Moshe. This provides a completely different lesson to us also. The lesson is as follows. Moshe Rabbeinu probably understood how great he was even while in Midian. He understood that just because he was a shepherd for his father-in-law needing shelter didn't determine who he was. But instead of boasting, instead of trying to make a favorable impression on his father-in-law, he waited things out. Let himself be viewed as an underachiever. And when the time was right, he put in his effort and became an overachiever, commanding the respect of his father-in-law. It's an important lesson for us. Many of us need to feel that we're appreciated by others, need to make a favorable impression. And we'll act arrogantly, we'll boast in order to make that impression, we'll boast about all of our accomplishments. Moshe Rabbeinu tells us, do the exact opposite. Work on yourself. Make yourself better. Become that better person. In that sense, and in that way, the respect that you want, well, you'll command afterwards. You'll be that individual that everybody has a favorable impression on, and everybody respects. To everybody.